Okay, so we have all of our data here in our scatter plot start sheet. So let's create our scatter plots. Now we're going to start with the transaction amount versus the invoice price. So essentially what we have here, your invoice price, recall that that will always include whatever discounts have been taken off the face of that invoice. And the pocket revenue, that is the price, well, the pocket price, that is the price after you have already taken into account any rebates that may be going back to the customer on the back end. So, for the transaction amount, that is tied to your invoice amount because it's essentially just whatever the invoice price is times the quantity for that transaction. So in this case, invoice amount and transaction amount are the same. So let's create our first scatter plot. Just select the data here and highlight it in columns A and B. And on the menu, go to Insert. Under Charts, there is a Scatter Plot option, and just choose a regular scatter chart here. We'll move it into place up here, expand it up just a little bit so you can see what's going on. Okay, and let's begin modifying this. First off, let's take care of the axes right here. Well, here, let's add in our axis titles. So here on the vertical axis, this is your invoice price. That's in US dollars. Down here on the horizontal axis, this is your transaction amount. That is also in US dollars. Okay, for the vertical axis here, let's modify this. If we right-click on Format Axis, that'll take us right to the sections where we can set the bounds of the axis, the minimum and maximum. What we're looking for is down here under Number, you can adjust what the formatting is for your axis. For our purposes, we can just leave it on the number formatting, but we don't need any decimal places because that's not useful information here. It is unnecessary, so we'll just remove that. And down here on the transaction amount, you can see that this is going in $50,000 increments here. So I'm actually going to adjust the formatting on the horizontal axis as well. And what I'll do is I'll actually use a custom formatting code. I'll just go down here to Custom. And let's see, I actually already have this programmed in here, you can see. But the way that this code works is you put in a $, comma, $, $0, comma, double quote, a capital K, and then in that double quote. And when you put in that formatting code here, what that does is it rounds everything off to the nearest 10,000. So it makes it much easier to read the numbers because when your numbers start to get too large, it helps to use abbreviations like this. It cleans up your chart just a little bit. Okay, and let's take a look at this title now. This is, we'll call this transaction amount, excuse me, that should be invoice price versus transaction amount. Okay, and the reason for this order is that generally you will put your dependent variable on your vertical axis and your independent variable on your horizontal axis. So what that framing the problem like that implies that you are looking to see what happens as you change that independent variable along your vertical axis, in this case the transaction amount. If that transaction amount increases or decreases, are you seeing a change in that vertical axis, the dependent variable? So with your chart title, you want to make sure you put the dependent variable, that horizontal axis first, versus whatever your, put your vertical axis versus whatever's on your horizontal axis. Your dependent variable versus your independent variable. And once you do that, okay, it looks like we are all set here then. So we have all the formatting set up for our very first chart. So what we're going to do here is we can actually just copy this, because I already have the data for both charts on the same sheet here. I'm just going to select this chart, use Control-C to copy it, and just paste it right next to here. Okay? Now, this one, we're not going to be looking at the invoice price. We actually want to see the pocket price versus the transaction amount. Okay, and when you have the second chart highlighted, that will show you where on the sheet it's pulling in your data. So with your second chart highlighted, scroll back over here to the left. You can see it's bringing in the invoice amount versus the invoice price. Now keep in mind that this invoice amount here in column A, that is our transaction amount as well. So for the second chart, we actually, we just want to substitute the pocket price in instead of the invoice price. So you can simply take this and drag it over to the data set that you want. And when you do that, that will update your chart accordingly. Now, all of these values here on the vertical axis, this is all your pocket price now. So make sure that you update your label here for your axis as well. Okay. And okay, and because all of the formatting is exactly the same, the only thing I would say that you would want to do here is to make sure that the vertical axis for both of your charts, that there's uniformity there. It can be very useful to plug in your invoice price versus one of your market variables, in this case transaction amount, and then after taking a look at what's going on with the invoice price, compare it to the pocket price for that same market variable. So to make that comparison a little bit easier, and because this is entirely the same product, we're not changing anything from one chart to the next in terms of product or categories, let's just unify the axes for both of this. So you can see that the minimum value, if we were to set the minimum at $40 for the vertical axis, that would include all of the data. And then it looks like we'll want to go up to 120 for the maximum. So on both of these charts, just right click, choose Format Axis, and set the minimum to 40. And the maximum is already at 120 for that one. And then on the second chart, same thing. Set the minimum as 40 and then 120 for the maximum. And that's just for consistency between your two charts, so that you can, so that you are in fact, you can compare apples to apples between the two charts, because the scale is the exact same here. So just looking here side by side to see what sort of changes, if any, popped up. One of the first things I notice here is that when you're looking at your invoice price, it looks like you essentially only have two tiers of pricing. right here and right here. So there are essentially two invoice prices that are being offered to your market. But once you factor in all of the rebates by looking at your pocket price, you can see that more variation emerges. You have more than just two tiers here. So that begs the question, what is causing that variation? Does the correlation exist for the pocket price? Keep in mind that as you go through this, you are constantly looking for what the reality is. What is the story that you see here? What is your data telling you? And you'll want to do a few different iterations. Perhaps try a few different approaches to looking at your data. So these are your two basic scatter plots that I begin almost every project with. Take a look at the invoice price versus your transaction amount. Take a look at your pocket price versus your transaction amount. See if anything begins to appear. But there are a few additional ways that you could graph this data. Many different ways. But let's take a look at two additional variations on the scatter plot next.